the final part of Walden. We are here. So we are skipping some more chapters. We're on the village. We're only going to be reading the second half of this chapter today, and then moving on to higher. Gosh, there's two more later chapters, and we'll read the conclusion as well. The conclusion is just so powerful that it culminates this, brings this book to a culmination so well, and it gets to that pinnacle of what he is trying to articulate so clearly throughout this book. Again, he's really just spending a lot of time in excruciating detail, highlighting the everyday, mundaneness of his life, as well as the particulars of the nature and society around him. Very interesting nonetheless. So the second half of this chapter is going to be about him getting thrown in jail because he's not listening to the authorities around him. But also, kind of was thinking about this over the weekend. Part of my view of the West in general, Western society, is that it really culminates, it really can be boiled down to two books if you wanted to break it down to two source texts. And it's undeniably one of those texts would be the Bible. Christianity has an undeniable influence on Western society. But then the other book I would say, and this is I would be driving this from what Alan Bloom said about Plato's Republic, is that all of philosophy and political science can their roots can all be seen to be starting to be shaped and formed from Plato's Republic. And so those two books in combination together are really what drives the Western mode of thought. And so to deny one of those on this quest for truth and this quest for knowledge would just be kind of a shame. So in addition to studying these philosophy, political science texts, I'm also I think it makes sense to read some of those Christian books as well. So not only just going through the Bible directly, but also reading books like St. Augustine's Confessions, or The City of God, Paradise Lost, or The Divine Comedy, Bonhoeffer, and we'll also be covering the philosophy of religion as well, which includes St. Thomas Aquinas, Blaise Pascal, and some other medieval thinkers that are just kind of out to lunch. Just hilarious to kind of look at, but then also some modern interpretations of that as well. And so it's a very clear narrative on these things perhaps aren't overly difficult to kind of get a general grasp of up until a lot of these studies after the maybe 1950s, this post World War II era, education and academia has really taken off, and it just becomes much more diverse and much more sophisticated in general. So going through these ancient texts, or these older texts in general, is just a lot easier for us to do together. But then as we start driving down into the more modern stuff, number one, we're probably going to face some copyright issues because copyrights expire after 100 years. So that'll be a bit difficult on how to cover on here. Perhaps we'll have to do some more summary and just perhaps some quotes in general. But as we work towards that, it'll perhaps get a bit more nuanced, and we'll have to revisit our approach on that and kind of think that through a bit. But yeah, suffice to say, this is the last day of Walden, and we have 2.5 chapters. Well, 1 page of this chapter, and then 2 full chapters to read through. So let's get started, and we'll go from there. So this one, he's just getting thrown in jail. I think it's because he didn't pay a tax. He was complaining that he was the clergyman was trying to come after him for a tax to pay towards the church because his father was a member there. But he said, "I have never gone to church in my life. Why would I pay this if I do not participate in such things?" And so he eventually got let off the hook for that. But I think there was another fine he was talking about, and so he was thrown in jail for the night. And he kind of describes the wooden door, the cast iron, and kind of the jail cell in general. And he was sharing a cell with someone who he describes as a drunkard, who perhaps unintentionally lit a barn on fire when he fell asleep after smoking his pipe. And so that's kind of the situation he finds himself in. And so here we go. One afternoon near the end of September, near the end of one afternoon near the end of summer, when I went to the village to get a shoe from the cobbler's, I was seized and put into jail because, as I've elsewhere related, I did not pay a tax to recognize the authority of the state which buys and sells men, women, and children, like cattle at the door of the Senate House. I had gone down to the woods for other purposes, but wherever a man goes, men will pursue and paw him with their dirty institutions, and if they can, constrain him to belong to their desperate odd-fellow society. It is true, I might have resisted forcibly with more or less effect, might have run amuck against society, but I prefer that society should run amuck against me, it being the desperate party. However, I was released the next day, obtained my mended shoe, and returned to the woods in season to get my dinner of huckleberries on Fairhaven Hill. I was never molested by any person but those who represented the state. I had no lock nor bolt but for the desk, which held my papers, not even a nail to put over my latch or windows. I never fastened my door night or day, though I was to be absent several days, not even when the next fall I spent a fortnight in the woods of Maine, and yet my house was more respected than if I had been surrounded by a file of soldiers. The tired rambler could rest and warm himself by my fire, the literary amuse himself with a few books on my table, or the curious by opening my closet and see what was left of my dinner, and what prospect I had of supper. Yet, though many people of every class came and went to this pond, I suffered no serious inconvenience from these sources. I had never missed anything but one small book, a volume of Homer, which perhaps was improperly gilded, and this I trust a soldier of our camp has found by this time. I am convinced that if all men were to live as simply as I did, thieving and robbery would be unknown. These take place only in communities where some have gotten more than is sufficient, while others have not enough. The Pope's Homers would soon be properly distributed. Quote, nor wars did men molest when only beseeching bowels were in request. You who govern public affairs, what need have you to employ punishments? Love virtue, and the people will be virtuous. The virtues of a superior man are like the wind. The virtues of a common man are like the grass. The grass, when the wind passes over, bends. And that's the end of that chapter. Man, he's calling he's calling out society for bending to the will of society and not standing up to it. I think that's really clear in what he's talking about in civil disobedience, which is what we're going to be looking towards tomorrow or the next time I record. Higher laws. This is so I did skip the chapter in between. Higher laws and then conclusion. Yeah, okay. So here we go. As I came home through the woods with my string of fish trailing my pole, it now being quite dark, I caught a glimpse of the woodchuck stealing across my path and felt a strange thrill of savage delight and was strongly tempted to seize and devour him raw. Not that I was hungry then, except for the wildness which he represents. Once or twice, however, while I lived at the pond, I found myself ranging the woods like a half-starved hound, with a strange abandonment, seeking some kind of venison which I might devour, and no morsel could have been too savage for me. The wildest scenes have become unaccountably familiar. I found in myself, and still find, an instinct towards a higher, or, as it is named, a spiritual life, as do most men, and another towards a primitive, rank, and savage one, and I reverence them both. I love the wild not less than the good. The wildness and adventure that are in fishing still recommend it to me. I like sometimes to take rank hold on life and spend my day more as the animals do. Perhaps I have owed it to this employment and to hunting when quite young, my closest acquaintance with nature. They early introduce us to and detain us in serenity with which otherwise at that age we should have little acquaintance. Fishermen, hunters, woodchoppers, and others spend their lives often in a more favorable mood for observing her, in the intervals of their pursuits, than philosophers or poets even, who approach her with expectation. She is not afraid to exhibit herself to them. The traveler on the prairie is naturally a hunter, on the headwaters of the Missouri and Columbia a trapper, and at the falls of St. Mary a fisherman. He who is only a traveler learns things at second hand and by the halves, and is poor authority. We are most interested when science reports what those men already know practically or instinctively, for that alone is a true humanity, or account of human experience. They mistake who assert that the Yankee has few amusements because he has not many public holidays, and men and boys do not play so many games as they do in England, for here the more primitive but solitary amusements of hunting, fishing, and the like have not yet given place to the former. Almost every New England boy among my contemporaries shouldered a fowling piece between the ages of and 10 and 14, and his hunting and fishing grounds were not limited like the preserves of the English nobleman, but were more boundless even than those of the savage. No wonder, then, that he did not oftener say to the play of the common, but already a change is taking place, owing not to an increased humanity, but to an increased scarcity of game. But perhaps the hunter is the greatest friend of the animals hunted, not expecting the humane society. Moreover, when at the pond, I wish sometimes to add fish to my fare for variety. I have actually fished for the same kind of necessity that the first fishers did. Whatever humanity I might conjure up against it all was factitious, and concerned my philosophy more than my feelings. I speak of fishing only now, for I have long felt differently about fowling. I'd sold my gun before I went to the woods. Now that I am less humane than others, but I did not perceive that my feelings were much affected. I did not pity the fishes nor the worms. This was habit. As for fowling, during the last years I carried a gun. My excuse was that I was studying ornithology and sought only new or rare birds. But I confess that I am now inclined to think that there is a finer way of studying ornithology than this. To be clear, I have no idea what that means. I assume it's the study of birds or something to that effect. It requires so much closer attention to the habit of the birds that if, for that reason only, I have been willing to omit the gun, yet notwithstanding the objection on the score of humanity, I am compelled to doubt if equally valuable sports are even substituted for these. And when some of my friends have asked me anxiously about their boys, whether they should let them hunt, I have answered yes, remembering that it was one of the best parts of my education. Make them hunters, though sportsmen only at first, if possible, mighty hunters at last, so that they will not find game large enough for them in this or any vegetable wilderness. Hunters as well as fishers of men, thus far I am the opinion of Chaucer's nun, who, quote, "Yave not of a text a polled hen, that saith the hunters been not holy men." Okay. Okay, here we go. The underline section. There is a period in the history of the individual, as of the race, when the hunters are the quote, best men, end quote, as the Algonquins called them. We cannot but pity the boy who has never fired a gun. He is no more humane, while his education has been sadly neglected. This was my answer with respect to those youths who were bent on this pursuit, trusting that they would soon outgrow it. No humane being, past the thoughtless age of boyhood, would wantonly murder any creature which holds its life by the same tenure that he does. The hare in its extremity cries like a child. I warn you, mothers, that my sympathies do not always make the usual philanthropic distinctions. Such is oftenest the young man's introduction to the forest, and the most original part of himself. He goes thither at first as a hunter and fisher, until at last, if he has the seeds of a better life in him, he distinguishes his proper objects as a poet or naturalist, it may be, and leaves the gun and fish pole behind. The mass of men are still and always young in this respect. In some countries, a hunting person is no more uncommon sight. Such a one might make a good shepherd's dog, but it is far from being the good shepherd. I have been surprised to consider that the only obvious employment, except wood chopping, ice cutting, or the like business, which ever to my knowledge did detained at Walden Pond for a whole half day, any of my fellow citizens, whether fathers or children of the town, with just one exception, was fishing. Commonly, they did not think that they were lucky or well paid for their time unless they got a long string of fish, though they had the opportunity of seeing the pond all the while. They might go there 1,000 times before the sediment of fishing would sink to the bottom and leave their purpose pure, but no doubt such a clarifying process would be going on all the while. The governor and his council faintly remember the pond, for while they were a-fishing there, while they were boys, but now they are too old and dignified to go a-fishing. And so they know it no more forever. Yet even they expect to go to heaven at last. If the legislature regards it, it is chiefly to regulate the number of hooks to be used there, but they know nothing about the hook of hooks with which to angle for the pond itself, impaling the legislature for a bait. Thus, even in civilized communities, the embryo man passes through the hunter stage of development. I have found repeatedly of late years that I cannot fish without falling a little in self-respect. I have tried it again and again. I have skill at it, and, like many of my fellows, a certain instinct for it, which revives from time to time. But always when I have done, I feel that it would have been better if I had not fished. I think that I do not mistake. It is a faint imitation, yet so are the first streaks of morning. There is unquestionably this instinct in me which belongs to the lower orders of creation, yet with every year I am less a fisherman, though without more humanity or even wisdom. At present I am no fisherman at all, but I see that if I were to live in the wilderness, I should again be tempted to become a fisher and hunter in earnest. Beside, there is something essentially unclean about this diet and all flesh. I began to see where housework commences and whence the endeavor, which costs so much to wear a tidy and respectable appearance each day, to keep the house sweet and free from all ills and odors and sights. Having been my own butcher and scullion, Scullion, and cook, as well as the gentleman for whom the dishes were served up, I can speak from an unusually complete experience. That practical objection to animal food, in my case, was its uncleanliness, and besides which I had caught and cleaned and cooked and eaten my fish, they seemed not to have fed me essentially. It was insignificant and unnecessary, and cost more than it came to. A little bread and a few potatoes would have done as well, with little trouble and filth. Like many of my contemporaries, I have rarely, for many years, used animal food or tea or coffee, not so much because of the ill effects which I had traced to them, as because they were not agreeable to my imagination. The repugnance to animal food is not the effect of experience, but it is an instinct. It appeared more beautiful to live low and fare hard in many respects, and though I never did so, I went far enough to please my imagination. I believe that every man who has ever been earnest to preserve his higher or poetic faculties in the best condition has been particularly inclined to abstain from animal food, and from much food of any kind. It is a significant fact, stated by entomologists. I find it in Kirby and Spence that, quote, some instincts in their perfect state, though furnished with organs of feeding, make no use of them, end quote. And they lay it down as a general rule that almost all instincts in this state eat much less than in that of larvae. The vocarous caterpillar, when transformed into a butterfly, and the gluttonous maggot, when become a fly, content themselves with a drop or two of honey or some other sweet liquid. The abdomen under its wings of the butterfly still represents the larva. This is the tidbit which tempts his insectivorous fate. The gross feeder is a man in the larva state, and there are whole nations in that condition, nations without fancy or imagination, whose vast abdomens betray them. There's probably some racist undertone there that we're just going to ignore for now. It is hard to provide and cook so simple and clean a diet as will not offend the imagination, but this, I think, is to be fed when we feed the body. They should both sit down at the table, yet perhaps this may be done. The fruits eaten temperately need not make us ashamed of our appetites, nor interrupt the worthiest pursuits, but put in extra condiment into your dish, and it will poison you. It is not worth a while to live by rich cookery. Most men would feel shame if caught preparing with their own hands precisely such a dinner, whether of animal or vegetable food, as is every day prepared for them by others. Yet till this is otherwise, we are not civilized, and if gentlemen and ladies are not true men and women, this certainly suggests what change needs to be made. It may be vain to ask why the imagination will not be reconciled to flesh and fat. I am satisfied that it is not. It is not a reproach that man is a carnivorous carnivorous animal. True, he can and does live in a great measure by preying on other animals, but this is a miserable way, as anyone who will go to snaring rabbits or slaughtering lambs may learn, and he will be regarded as a benefactor of his race, who shall teach man to confine himself to a more innocent and wholesome diet. Whatever my own practice may be, I have no doubt that it is part of the destiny of the human race in its gradual improvement to leave off eating animals as surely as the savage tribes have left off eating each other when they came in contact with the more civilized. If one listens to the faintest but constant suggestion of his genius, which are certainly true, he sees not what to extremes or even insanity it may lead him. And and yet that way, as he grows more resolute and faithful, his road lies. The faintest assured objection which one healthy man feels will at length prevail over the arguments and customs of mankind. No man ever followed his genius till it misled him, though the result were bodily weakness. Yet perhaps no one can say that the consequences were to be regretted, for these were a life in conformity to a higher principles. If the day and night are such that you greet them with joy, and life admits a fragrance like flowers and sweet scented herbs, is more elastic, more starry, more immortal, that is your success. All nature is your congratulation, and you have cause momentarily to bless yourself. The greatest gains and values are furthest from being appreciated. We easily come to doubt if they exist. We soon forget them. They are the highest reality. Perhaps the facts most astounding and most real are never communicated by man to man. The true harvest of my daily life are somewhat as intangible and indescribable as the tints of morning or evening. It is a little star dust caught, a segment of the rainbow which I have clutched. For Yet, for my part, I was never unusually squeamish. I could sometimes eat a fried rat with a good relish, if it were necessary. I am glad to have drunk water so long, for the same reason that I prefer the natural sky to an opium eater's haven. Opium eater's haven. I would fain keep sober always, and there are infinite degrees of drunkenness. I believe that water is the only drink for the wise man. Wine is not so noble a liquor, and think of dashing out the hopes of morning with a cup of warm coffee, or of the evening with a dish of tea. Ah, how low I fall when tempted by them. Even music may be intoxicating. Such apparently slight causes destroyed Greece and Rome, and will destroy England and America. Of all, of all ebriosity, who does not prefer to be intoxicated by the air he breathes? I have found it to be the most serious objection to coarse being labors long continued, that they compelled me to eat and drink coarsely also. But to tell the truth, I find myself at present somewhat less particular in these respects. I carry less religion to the table, ask no blessings, not because I am wiser than I was, but I am obliged to confess, because however much it is to be regretted, with years I have grown more coarse and indifferent. Perhaps these questions are entertained only in youth, as most believe of poetry. My practice is, quote, nowhere, end quote. My opinion is here. Nevertheless, I am far from regarding myself as one of those privileged ones to whom the Ved refers when it says that he who has no true faith in the omnipresent supreme being may eat all that exists. That is not bound to inquire what is his food or who prepares it, and even in their case it is to be observed, as a Hindu commentator has remarked, that the Vedant limits of this privilege to the time of distress? Who has not sometimes derived inexpressible satisfaction from his food, in which appetite had no share? I had been thrilled to think that I owed a mental perception to the commonly gross sense of taste, that I had been inspired through the plate that some berries which I had eaten on a hillside had fed my genius. The soul had not been mistress of herself, said Xiong Sang. Ooh, Thsengtsu. Goodness gracious. One looks and one does not see, one listens. And one does not hear, one eats. And one does not know the savor of food. He who distinguishes the true savor of his food can never be a glutton. He who does not cannot be otherwise. A Puritan may go to his brown bread crust with as gross an appetite as even an alderman to his turtle. Not that food which entereth into the mouth defileth a man, but the appetite with which it was eaten. It is neither the quality nor the quantity, but the devotion to the sensual savors. One that which is eaten is not a viand to sustain our animal or inspire our spiritual life, but food for the worms that possess us. If the hunger has a taste for mud turtles, muskrats, and other such savage tidbits, the fine lady indulges a taste for jelly made of a calf's foot, or the sardines from over the sea, and they are even. He goes to the mill pond, she to her perverse pot. The wonder is how you and I, can live this slimy, beastly life, eating and drinking. Our whole life is startlingly mortal. There is never an instant's truce between virtue and vice. Goodness is the only investment that never fails. In the music of the harp which trembles around the world, it is the insisting on this which thrills us. The harp is the traveling patterer for the universe's insurance company, recommending its laws and our little goodness in all its assessment that we pay. Though the youth at last grows indifferent, the laws of the universe are not indifferent, but are forever on the side of the most sensitive. Listen to every zephyr, for every reproof, for it is surely there, and he is not unfortunate who does not hear it. We cannot touch a string or move a stop, but the charming mortal transfixes us. Many an irksome noise, go a long way off, is heard as music, a proud, sweet satire on the meanness of our lives. We are conscious of an animal in us, which awaken in proportion as our higher nature slumbers. It is reptile and sensual, and perhaps cannot be wholly expelled, like worms, which even in life and health occupy our bodies. Possibly we may withdraw from it, but never change in its nature. I fear that it may enjoy a certain health of its own, that we may be well, yet not pure. The other day I picked up the lower jaw of a hog with white and sound teeth and husks, which suggested that there was in animal health and vigor distinct from the spiritual. This creature succeeded by other means than temperance and purity, that in which men differ from the brute beasts. Is a thing very inconsiderable, the common herd lose it very soon. Superior men preserve it carefully. Who knows what sort of life would result if we had attained to purity? Attained to purity. Okay. Who knows of what sort of life would result if we had attained to purity? If I knew so wise a man as could teach me purity, I would go to seek him forthwith. A command over our passions and over the external senses of the body and good acts, and declared by the vet to be indispensable in the mind's approximation to God. Yet the spirit can for the time pervade and control every member and function of the body, and transmute what inform in the grossest sensuality and purity and devotion, the generative energy which, when we are loose, dissipates and makes us unclean, when we are content, invigorates and inspires us. Chastity is the flowering of man, and what are called genius, heroism, holiness, and the like are but various fruits which succeed it. Man flows at once to God when the channel of purity is opened. By turns, our impurity inspires, and our impurity casts us down. He is blessed who is assured that the animal is dying out in him day by day, and the divine being established. Perhaps there is none but the cause for shame on account of the inferior and brutish nature to which he is allied. I feared that we are all such gods or demigods only as fawns and satyrs, satyrs, the divine allied to beasts, the creatures of appetite, and that to some extent our very life is our disgrace. Another little poem here. How happy he who hath due place assigned to his beasts and disafforded his mind, can use his horse, goat, wolf, and every beast, and is not ass himself to all the rest. Else man not only is the herd of swine, but he's those devils too which did incline them to a headlong rage and made them worse. End quote. End poem. Okay, that was odd. All sensuality is one, though it takes many forms. All purity is one. It is the same whether a man eat or drink or cohabit or sleep sensually. They are but one appetite, and we only need to see a person do any one of these things to know how great of a sensualist he is. The impure can neither stand nor sit with purity. When the reptile is attacked at one mouth of his burrow, he shows himself at another. If you would be chaste, you must be temperate. What is chastity? How shall a man know if he is chaste? He shall not know it. One sec. Just going to sorry, just had to blow my nose. The impure can neither stand nor sit with purity. When the reptile is attacked at one mouth of his burrow, he shows himself at another. If you would be chaste, you must be temperate. What is chastity? How shall a man know if he is chaste? He shall not know it. We have heard of this virtue, but we know not what it is. We speak comfortably to the rumor which we have heard. From exertion come wisdom and purity, from sloth, ignorance, and sensuality. In the student, sensually is a sluggish habit of mind. An unclean person is universally a slothful one who sits by a stove, whom the sun shines on prostrate, who reposes without being fatigued. If you would avoid uncleanness, all the sins, work earnestly, though it be at cleaning a stable. Nature is hard to be overcome, but she must be overcome. What avails is that you are a Christian if you are not pure? What avail is it? Let me try that again. Nature is hard to be overcome, but she must be overcome. What avails it that you are a Christian if you are not purer than the heathen? If you deny yourself no more, if you are not more religious? I know of many systems of religion esteemed heathenness, whose precepts fill the reader with shame and provoke him to new endeavors, though it be for performance of rites merely. I hesitate to say these things, but it is not because of the subject. I care not how obscene my words are, but because I cannot speak them without betraying my impurity. We discourse freely without shame of one form of sensuality and are silent about another. We are so degraded that we cannot speak simply of the necessary functions of human nature. In earlier ages, in some countries, every function was reverently spoken of and regulated by law. Nothing was too trivial for the Hindu lawgiver, however offensive it may be to modern tastes. He teaches how to eat, drink, cohabit, void, excrement, and urine, and the like, elevating what is mean, and does not falsely excuse himself by calling these things trifles. As last page of this paragraph. Every man is the builder of a temple called his body, to the God he worships, after a style purely his own. Nor can he get off by hammering marble instead. We are all sculptors and painters, and our material is our own flesh and blood and bones. Any nobleness begins at once to refine a man's features, any meanness or sensuality to imbrute them. John Farmer sat at his door once, September, as John Farmer sat at his door one September evening, after a hard day's work, his mind still running with his labor more or less. Having bathed, he sat down to recite his intellectual man. It was a rather cool evening, and some of his neighbors were apprehending a frost. He had not attended to the train of his thoughts long when he heard someone playing on a flute, and that sound harmonized with his mood. Still he thought of his work, but the burden of his thought was that though this kept running in his head, and he found himself planning and contriving it against his will, yet it concerned him very little. It was no more than the scruff of his skin, which was constantly shuffled off, but the notes of the flute came home to his ears out of a different sphere from that which he worked in, and suggested work for certain faculties which slumbered in him. They gently did away with the street and the village and the state in which he lived. A voice said to him, "Why do you stay here and live this mean, moiling life, when a glamorous existence is possible for you? Those same stars twinkle over the fields, over other fields than these. But how to come out of this condition and actually migrate thither?" All that he could think of was to practice some new austerity, to let his mind descend into his body and redeem it, and treat himself with ever increasing respect. I'm going to read that last couple sentences again because I like them. Why do you stay here and live this mean, moiling life when a glorious existence is possible for you? Those same stars twinkle over other fields than these. But how to come out of this condition and actually migrate thither? All that he could think of was to practice some new austerity, to let his mind descend into his body and redeem it, and treat himself with ever increasing respect. And that's the end of that chapter. And we're finally, again, we are skipping a chapter called Brute Neighbors. A couple chapters, actually. Brute Neighbors, Housewarming, Former Inhabitants and Winter Visitors, Winter Animals. These are all the names of chapters that we're skipping. The Pond in the Winter, The Pond in Winter. He even has a map outlining how big it is. Skipping a chapter called Spring. He's really just going into the details of it quite a bit. Okay, so this is, so I'm going to read the last sentence of Spring. This was my first year's life in the woods completed, and the second year was similar to it. I finally left Walden September 6, 1847. If I remember correctly, I proposed to Danielle September 6. I mean, there's many years in between. It's 2014? 14, 15. Yeah, 2014. At least it was at the beginning of September. I don't remember. Perhaps I don't remember the exact date, but it was right around the same time. And 1847 is when he left Walden. It's just kind of crazy, like when he actually named the actual date. Like, oh yeah, they had the same Gregorian calendar system that we did. Just like not something you always think of, and it's just like, oh, just another 4 seasons pass, another year. It's like the illusion of time, the separation of time is just like, I mean, Kierkegaard phrases it so well in his book, and it'll be good to get there when we get there. Okay, conclusion. To the sick, the doctors wisely recommend a change of air and scenery. Thank heaven, here is not all the world. The buckeye does not grow in New England, and the mockingbird is rarely heard here. The wild goose is more of a cosmopolite than we. He breaks his fast in Canada, takes a luncheon in Ohio, and plumes himself for the night in southern Bayou. Even the bison, to some extent, keeps pace with the seasons, cropping the pastures of the Colorado, only till a greener and sweeter grass awaits him by the Yellowstone. Yet we think that if rail fences are pulled down and stone walls piled up on our farms, bounds are henceforth set to our lives, and our fates decided. If you are if you are chosen town clerk, forsooth you cannot go to a tierra del Fuego this summer. But you may go to the land of infernal fire nonetheless. The universe is wilder than our views of it. Yet we should oftener look over the trifler of our craft, like curious passengers, and not make the voyage like stupid sailors picking oakum. These are a lot of words I don't know. Trial do Frago? uh, okay. Oakum? Oakum? Okay, interesting. The other side of the globe is but the home of our correspondent. Our voyaging is only great circle sailing, and the doctors prescribe for diseases of the skin merely. One hastens to southern Africa to chase the giraffe, but surely that is not the game he would be after. How long, pray, would a man hunt giraffes if he could? Snipes and woodcocks also may afford rare sport, but I trust it would be nobler game to shoot oneself. Another little quote. Direct your eyesight inwards, and you'll find 1,000 regions in your mind yet undiscovered. Travel them, and be expert in home cosmology. What does Africa, what does the West stand for? It is not our interior white on the chart. What does Africa, what does the West stand for? Is not our own interior white on the chart? Black through it may prove. Like the coast when discovered, it is the source of the Nile or the Niger or the Mississippi or a northwest passage around this continent that we would find. Are these the problems which most concern mankind? Is Franklin the only man who is lost, that his wife should be so earnest to find him? Does Mr. Gringle know where he is himself? Be rather the Mungo Park, the Lewis, the Clark, the Frobisher of your own streams and oceans. Explore your own higher latitudes with shiploads of preserved meats to support you, if they be necessary, and pile the empty cans sky high for a sign, where preserved meats intended to preserve meat merely. Nay, be a Columbus to hold new continents and worlds within you, opening new channels not of trade but of thought. Every man is the lord of a realm beside which the earthly empire of the Tsar is but a petty state, a hammock left by the ice. Yet some can be patriotic who have no self-respect, and sacrifice the greater to the less. They love the soil which makes their graves, but have no sympathy with the spirit which may still animate. I screwed that up. I'm reading that sentence again. Yet some can be patriotic who have no self-respect, and sacrifice the greater to the less. They love the soil which makes their graves, but have no sympathy with the spirit which still animate their clay. Patriotism is a maggot in their heads. What is the meaning of that South Sea exploring expedition, with all its parade and expense, but in indirect recognition of the fact that there are continents and seas in this mortal world to which every man is a isthmus or an inlet yet unexplored by him, but that it is easier to sail many thousand miles through cold and storms and cannibals in a government ship with 500 men and boys to assist one than it is to explore the private sea, the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean of one's being alone. Let them wander and scrutinize the outlandish Australians. I have more of God, and they more of the road. It is not worthwhile to go. It is not worth the while to go round the world to count the cats in Zanzibar. Yet do this even till you can do better, and you may perhaps find some Simmy's hole by which to get at the inside at last. England and France, Spain, Portugal, Gold Coast, and Slave Coast all front on this private sea, but no bark from them has ventured out of sight of land, though it is without doubt the direct way to India. If you would learn to speak all tongues and conform to the customs of a nation, if you would travel farther than all travelers, be naturalized in all climes, and cause the Sphinx to dash her head against a stone, even obey the precept of the old philosopher and explore thyself, herein are demanded the eye and the nerve. Only the defeated and deserters go to wars, cowards that run away and enlist. Start now on that furthest western way, which does not pause at the Mississippi or the Pacific, nor conduct toward a worn out China or Japan, but leads on a tangent to this sphere, summer and winter, day and night, sun down, moon down, and at last earth down too. It is said that the Marabou took to highway robbery to ascertain what degree of resolution was necessary in order to place oneself in a formal opposition to the most sacred laws of society. He declared that a soldier who fights in the ranks does not require half so much courage as a footpad. That honor and religion have never stood in the way of a well considered and a firm resolve. This was this was manly, and the world as the world goes, and yet it was idle, if not desperate. A saner man would have found himself often enough in formal opposition to what are deemed the most sacred laws of society, though obedience to yet more sacred laws, and so have tested his resolution without going out of his way. It is not for a man to put himself in such an attitude to society, but to maintain himself in whatever attitude he finds himself through obedience to the laws of his being, which will never be one of opposition to a just government if he should chance to meet with such. Okay, this next big paragraph is all underlined. I have left the woods for as good as reason as I went there. Perhaps it seemed to me that I had several more lives to live, and could not spare any more time for that one. It is remarkable how easily and insensibly we fall into a particular route and make a beaten track for ourselves. I had not lived there a week before my feet wore a path from my door to the pond side, and though it is 5 or 6 years since I trod it, it is still quite distinct. It is true, I fear that others may have fallen into it and so helped to keep it open. The surface of the earth is soft and impressionable by the feet of men, and so with the paths which the mind travels. How worn and dusty then must the highways of the world, how deep the ruts of tradition and conformity. I do not wish to take a cabin passage, but rather to go before the mast and on the deck of the world, for there I could best see the moonlight amid the mountains. I do not wish to go below now. I learned this, at least by my experiment, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will be met with success unexpected in common hours. He will put some things behind, will pass an invisible boundary. New, universal, and more liberal laws will begin to establish themselves around and within him, or the old laws will be expanded and interpreted in his favor in a more liberal sense, and he will live with the license of a higher order of beings. In proportion as he simplifies his life, the laws of the universe will appear less complex. The solitude will not be solitude, nor poverty poverty, or nor weakness weakness. If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. It is a ridiculous demand which England and America make that you shall speak so that you can understand. It is a ridiculous demand which England and America make that you shall speak so that they can understand you. Neither men, neither men nor toadstools grow so, as if they were important, as if that were important, and there were not enough to understand you without them. As if nature could support but one order of understandings, could not sustain birds as well as quadrupeds, flying as well as creeping things, and hush and who, which bright can understand, were the best English, as if there were safety in stupidity alone. I fear chiefly least my expression may not be extravagant enough, may not wander far enough beyond the narrow limits of my daily experience, so as to be adequate to the truth of which I have been convinced. Extravagance. It depends on how you are yarded. The migrating buffalo, which seeks new pastures and other latitude, is not extravagant like the cow which kicks over the pail, leaps the cow yard fence, and runs after her calf in milking time. I desire to speak somewhat without bounds. Like a man in a waking moment, like a man in a waking moment, to men in their waking moments, for I am convinced that I cannot exaggerate enough even to lay the foundations of true expression. Who that has heard a strain of music feared, then least he should speak extravagantly any more forever. In view of the future or possible, we should live quite laxly and undefined in font. Our outlines dim and misty on that side, and as our shadows reveal in insensible precipitation towards the sun, the volatile truth of our words should continually betray the inadequacy of our residual statement. Their truth is instantly translated, its literal monument alone remains. The words which express our faith and piety are not definite, yet they are significant, like fragrant and they are significant and fragrant, like frankincense to superior natures. Why level downward to our dullest perception always, and praise that as common sense? The commonest sense is the sense of man asleep, which they express by snoring. Sometimes we are inclined to class those who are once and a half witted with the half witted because we appreciate only a third part of their wit. Some would find fault with the morning read if they ever got up early enough. They pretend, as I hear, that the verses of Kabir have four different senses: illusion, spirit, intellect, and the exoteric doctrine of the Vedas, Vedas. But in this part of the world, it is considered a ground for complaint if a man's writings admit of more than one interpretation. While England endeavors to cure the potato rot, will not any endeavor to cure the brain rot which prevails so much more widely and fatally? I do not suppose that I have attained to obscurity, but I should be proud if no more fatal fault were found with my pages on this score than was found within the Walden ice. Southern customers objected to its blue color, which is the evidence of its purity, as if it were muddy, and preferred the Cambridge ice, which is white but tastes of weeds. The purity men love is like the mist which envelop the earth, and is not like the either ether beyond. Azure ether beyond. Some are dining in our ears that we Americans and moderns generally are intellectual dwarfs compared with the ancients, or even the Elizabethan man. But what is that to the purpose? A living dog is better than a dead lion. Shall a man go hang himself because he belongs to the race of pygmies, and not be the biggest pygmy that he can? Let every one mind his own business, and endeavor to be what he was made. Why should we be in such desperate haste to succeed, and in such desperate enterprises? If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away. It is not important that he should mature as soon as the apple tree, or oak tree. Shall he turn his spring into summer? If the condition of things which we were made for is not yet, what were any reality which we can substitute? We shall not be shipwrecked on a vain reality. Shall we with pains erect a heaven? Oh my goodness. Shall we with pains erect a heaven of bluegrass over ourselves? Though when it is done, we shall be sure to glaze still at the true ethereal heaven far above, as if the former were not. There was an artist in the city of Kourou who was disposed to strive after perfection. One day it came into his mind to make a staff, having considered that it is an imperfect work time is an ingredient, but into a perfect work time does not enter, he said to himself. It shall be perfect in all respects, though I should do nothing else in my life. He proceeded instantly to the forest for wood, being resolved that if he shall not be made of unsuitable material, as and as he searched for and rejected stick after stick, his friends gradually deserted him. For they grew old in their works and died. But he grew not older by a moment. His singleness of purpose and resolution, his elevated piety, endowed him, without his knowledge, with perennial youth. As he made no compromise with time, time kept out of his way, and only sighed at a distance because he could not overcome him. Before he had found a stock in all respects suitable, the city of Kuru was a hooray ruin, and he sat on one of its mounds to peel the stick. Before he had given it proper shape, and the dy- dynasty of the Kandahars was at an end, and with the point of the stick he wrote the name of the last of the race in the sand, and then he resumed his work. By the time he had smoothed and polished the staff, Kalpa was no longer the pole star, and ere he had put on the ferrule and the head adorned by the precious stones, Brahma, Brahma had awoken slumbered many times. But why do I stay to mention these things? When the finishing stroke was put into his work, it suddenly expanded before his eyes of the astonished artist into the fairest of all creatures of Brahma. He had made a new system in making that staff, a world with full and fair proportions, in which, though the old cities and dynasties had passed away, fairer and more glorious ones had taken their place. And now he saw by the heap of their shavings still fresh at his feet that, for him and his work, the former lapse of time had been an illusion, and that no more time had elapsed than is required for a single scintillion from the brain of Brahma to fall on the inflame the tinder of a mortal brain. The material was pure, and his art was pure. How could the result be other than wonderful? No face which we can give to a matter will steed us so well as the last steed us so well at last as the truth. This alone, this alone wears well. For the most part, we are not where we are, but in a false position. Stand by. We're in like the final 4 pages here. This alone wears well. For the most part, we are not where we are, but in a false position. Through the infirmity of our natures, we suppose a case and put ourselves into it, and hence we are two cases at the same time, and it is doubly difficult to get out. In sane moments, we regard only the facts and the case, that is, say what you have to say, not what you ought. Any truth is better than make-believe. Tom Hyde, the tinker, standing on the gallows, was asked if he had anything to say. Tell the tailors to remember to make a knot in their thread before they take the first stitch. His companion's prayer is forgotten. However mean your life is, meet it and live it. Do not shun it and call it hard names. It is not so bad as you are. It looks poorest when you are richest. The fault finder will find faults even in paradise. Love your life, poor as it is. You may perhaps have some pleasant, thrilling, glorious hours, even in a poorhouse. The setting sun is reflected from the windows of the almshouse, and it as brightly as from the rich man's abode. The snow melts before its door as early in the spring. I do not see but a quiet mind may live as contentedly there, and have as cheering thoughts as in a palace. The town's poor seem to me often to live the most independent lives of any. May they, may be they, may be they are simply great enough to receive without misgiving. Most think that they are above being supported by the town, but it oftener happens that they are not above supporting themselves by dishonest means, which should be more disreputable. Cultivate poverty like a garden herb, like sage. Do not trouble yourself much to get new things, whether clothes or friends. Turn the old, return to them. Turn the old, return to them. Things do not change, we change. Sell your clothes and keep your thoughts. God will see that you do not want society. If I were confined to a corner of a garret all my days, like a spider, the world would be just as large to me while I had my thoughts about me. The philosopher said, from an army of 3 divisions, one can take away its general and put it in disorder. From the mo- from the man the most abject and vulgar, one cannot take away his thought. Do not seek so anxiously to be developed, to subject yourself to many influences to be played on. It is all a dissipation. Humility, like darkness, reveals the heavenly lights. The shadows of poverty and meanness gather round us, and lo, creation widens to our view. We are often reminded that if there were bestowed on us the wealth of Croesus, our aims must still be the same, and our means essentially the same. Moreover, if you are restricted by your range of poverty, if you cannot buy books and newspapers, for instance, you are but confined to the most significant and vital experiences. You are compelled to deal with the material which yields the most sugar and the most starch. It is life near to the bone where it is sweetest. You are defended from being a trifler. No man loses ever lower on a lower mean of magnanimity on a higher. Superfluous wealth can buy superfluities only. Money is not required to buy one necessity of the soul. I live in the angle of the Leyden wall, into whose composition was poured a little alloy of bell metal. Often in the repose of my midday, there reaches my ears a confused tintinnabulum from without. It is the noise of my contemporaries. My neighbor tells me of their adventures with famous gentlemen and ladies, what nobilities they met at the dinner table, but I am no more interested in such things than in the contents of the Daily Times. Their interest and the conversation are about costume and manners chiefly, but a goose is a goose still. Dress it as you will. They tell me of California and Texas and of England and of the Indies and of the Honorable Mr. of Georgia or of Massachusetts, and all transient and fleeting phenomena, till I am ready to leap from their courtyard like the Mameluke Bey. I delight to come to my bearings, not walk in possession with pomp and parade in a conspicuous place, but to walk even with the builder of the universe, if I may, not to live in this restless, nervous, bustling, trivial 19th century, but stand or sit thoughtfully while it goes by. What are men celebrating? They are all on a committee of arrangements, and hourly expect a speech from somebody. God is but the president of the day, and Webster is his orator. I love to weigh, to settle, to gravitate toward that which most strongly and rightfully attracts me. Not hang by the beam of the scale and try to weigh less. Not suppose a case, but take the case that is, to travel the only path I can, and that on which no power can resist me. It affords me no satisfaction to commence to spring an arch before I have got a solid foundation. Let us not play at kettle benders. There is a solid bottom everywhere. We read that the traveler asked the boy if the swamp before him had a hard bottom. The boy replied that it had. But presently, the traveler's horse sank up to the girths, and he observed to the boy, I thought you said that this bog had a hard bottom. So it has. So it has, answered the latter, but you have not gotten halfway to it. And so it is with bogs and quicksands of society. But he is an old boy that knows that. Only what is thought, said, or done at a certain rare coincidence is good. I would not be one of those who foolishly drive a nail into the mere lath and plastering. Such a deed would keep me awake nights. Give me a hammer. Let me feel for the furrowing. Do not depend on the putty. Drive a nail home and clench it so faithfully that you will wake up in the night and think of your work with satisfaction, a work at which you would not be ashamed to invoke the muse. So will help you God, and so only. Every nail driven should be another rivet in the machine of the universe, you carrying on the work. Rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth. I sat at a table where where were rich food and wine in abundance, and obsequies attendance, but serenity and truth were not. Oh, sorry, but sincerity and truth were not. And I went away hungry from the inhospitable board. The hospitality was as cold as the ices. I thought that there were no need of ice to freeze them. They talked to me of the age of the wine and fame and of the vintage, but I thought of a new, uh, but I thought of an older, a newer, a pure wine of a more glorious vintage, which they had not got and could not buy. The style, the house, and the grounds and entertainment passed for nothing with me. I called on the king, but he made me wait in this hall and conducted like a man incapacitated for hospitality. There was a man in my neighborhood who lived in a hollow tree. His manners were truly regal. I should have done better had I called on him. I should have done better if I had called on him. How long shall we sit in our porticos practicing idle and musty virtues? Practicing idle and musty virtues, which any work would make impertinent, as if one were to begin the day with long suffering and hire a man to hoe his potatoes, and in the afternoon go forth to practice Christian meekness and charity with goodness aforethought. Consider the China pride and stagnant self-complacency of mankind. This generation reclines a little to congratulate itself on being the last of an illustrious line, and in Boston and London and Paris and Rome, thinking of its long descent, it speaks of its progress in art and science and literature with satisfaction. There are the great records of philosophical societies and the public eulogies of great men. It is the good Adam contemplating his own virtue. Yes, we have done great deeds and sung divine songs, which shall never die. That is, as long as we can remember them. The learned societies and the great men of Assyria, where are they? What youthful philosophers and experimentalists we are. There is not one of my readers who has yet lived a whole human life. These may be but the spring months in the life of the race. If we have had the 7 years itch, we have not seen the 17-year locust in the Concord. We are acquainted with a mere pencil of the globe where we live. Most have not delved 6 feet beneath the surface, nor leaped as many above it, yet know not where we are. Beside, we are sound asleep nearly half of the time, yet we esteem ourselves wise, and have an established order on the surface. Truly, we are deep thinkers, we are ambitious spirits. As I stand over the insect crawling amid the pine needles on the forest floor, and endeavoring to conceal itself from my sight, and ask myself why it will cherish those humble thoughts, and hide its head from me who might, perhaps be its benefactor, and impart to its race something cherish, some cheering information. I am reminded of the greater benefactor and intelligence that stands over me, the human insect. There is an incessant influx of novelty into this world, and yet we tolerate incredible dullness. I need only suggest what kind of sermons are still listened to in the most enlightened countries. There are such words as joy and sorrow, but they are only the burden of the psalm, sung with a nasal twang. While we believe in the ordinary and mean, we think that we can change our clothes only. It is said that the British Empire is very large and respectable, and that the United States are a first-rate power. We do not believe that a tide rises and falls behind every man, which can float the British Empire like a chimp. If he should even harbor in its mind, who knows what sort of 17-year locust will come out of the ground. The government of the world I live in was not framed like that of Britain, in after-dinner conversations over wine. The life in us is like the water in the river. It may rise this year higher than man has ever known it, and flood the parched uplands. Even this may be the eventful year, which will drown out all our muskrats. It will not always dry land where we dwell. I see far inland the banks which the stream anciently washed, before science began to record its freshets. Everyone has heard the story which has gone the rounds of New England, of a strong, beautiful bug which came out of the dry leaf of an old table of apple tree wood, which had stood in a farmer's kitchen for 60 years, first in Connecticut and afterwards in Massachusetts, from an egg deposited in the living tree many years earlier. Still, as appeared by counting the annual layers beyond it, which was heard gnawing out for several weeks, hatched perchance by the heat of the urn, who does not feel his faith in resurrection and immortality strengthened by hearing of this? Who knows what beautiful and winged life, whose egg has been buried for ages under many concentric layers of woodenness in the dead dry life of society, deposited at first in the auburn of the green and living tree, which has been gradually converted into the semblance of its well-seasoned tomb, heard perchance gnawing out for years by its astonished family of man, as they sat round the festive board, many unexpectedly came forth from amidst. Amidst society's most trivial and hand-selled furniture to enjoy its perfect summer's life at last. I do not say that John or Jonathan will realize all this, but such is the character of the morrow which mere lapse of time can never make to dawn. The light which puts out our eyes is darkness to us. Only that day dawns to which we are awake. There is more day to dawn. The sun is but a morning star. The end. Wow. We are finally done, Walden. It's and that's it. I don't want to say too much because I think the book speaks for itself, and I don't think I can add much to it more than that. So, till next time. Peace.